Welcome to Your Success Podcast. We give you actionable insight and stories behind real-life success wherever you go. Here are your hosts, Angelos and Mo.
Welcome to Your Success Podcast. I'm Angelos, and today we're in the Exeter Golf and Country Club in this nice grand hall. And we are answering the question of whether there are still opportunities to make money investing through property. So our special guest today is Vicki Wusche, and Vicki started investing for herself and family in 2008. Within just 5 years, she had been listed in the Telegraph as one of the top UK's 25 most influential people in property. As an author, she has written 4 books and contributed to a further 3. She regularly speaks at property and business events, helping the audience to see how they can make more money easily. In 2016, in just 6 months, she bought 14 properties for clients, spending £849,000 of their £2.2 million pot and generated an average of 10% net return. In the last 7 years, she has bought 63 properties and raised over £5 million in joint venture money. But when she's not busy with her business, she's off on holiday, scuba diving as her alter ego, the Property Mermaid. So Vicki, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So can you just give us a little bit of a background on what you were doing before you got started investing in property?
Well, about a year before I got invested in property, I was living a perfectly normal life as a university lecturer, plodding along, earning a wage, happy, not thinking about how things might change, and out of the blue, the government funding for the project that I was on came to a standstill, and that was it. I was redundant. And there was some build-up to that. There was about a 6-month period, and I helped all my team find other jobs, and then got close to the end of the 6 months and sort of looked around, and I hadn't done anything for myself. And that was it. Redundant from a job I loved, in a sort of a state of grieving, because I had enjoyed that project so much, and at a loss what to do. So I thought, I know I'll be a consultant, because that's what everybody seems to be, as a consultant, and I'll just go out there and do what I love and get other people to pay me directly instead of the government. But what I didn't understand is that my current database, which was substantial at the time with all those contacts, were used to having me for free. The government paid for me, they never had to pay for me. So people will value you a lot when you're free, and they may not value you even though you do exactly the same thing for them, or possibly even better, when suddenly they have to pay for you at a daily rate, even if that daily rate then became extremely cheap. So I spent the next year doing all of the same things that I was doing before. So I was the chair of a charity helping refugees get back into jobs, because for me it was all about employment and contribution to the economy. And the other side, I was on the board of directors for a government-funded major redevelopment of South Kilburn, which is in London. And so I was still going to all of these meetings, still coming home at 10 o'clock at night. And I suddenly turned around and was sort of looking at the bank account, wondering why nothing was happening. And it's because no one was paying any invoices. In fact, they weren't paying invoices because I wasn't writing them, because I'd not agreed any of that money transfer. And I think that really made me recognise how important understanding what we're doing. We are always trading our time for money in some form or another, whether we are in control of our time and in control of that money, or whether we are giving our time to someone else who's in control of that money. And from that, I knew I had to do something. I'd always known that property was a good idea. When I look back at it, I didn't have the language for it, but right from when I was 16, 17 years old, I was aware of property all the time, but uneducated, and didn't have any language to express anything or anyone to talk to about it, or even in the level of unconsciousness, I didn't even know that I could have had a conversation with you about property.
Yeah.
And so then out popped an email that said, come along and do some training, and the rest is history. I then suddenly connected with people who were, if not thinking the same things I was thinking, at least were in that zone of talking about property, personal development, mindset, taking responsibility for your life.
So surrounding yourself with like-minded people.
Yes, and some weirdos. which,
They make you laugh.
The mix. Yes,
Yeah,
they're the chocolate. You know what they are? They're the dark chocolate bananas in a perfectly good banana ice cream. Chocolate bananas, yeah.
And who's going to say no to them?
Oh,
exactly.
Me. Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward to now.
Yeah.
We've gone through some of the achievements you've achieved, which are quite incredible, to be fair. But at the moment, the government seems to be really gunning for landlords. We have increased stamp duty, we have wear and tear allowances removed, we have lots of legislation coming our way. And I feel that some of these measures are quite punitive and appealing to certain segments of voters. Are there still opportunities to make money, and what is your view on the property market at the moment?
There are always opportunities to make money in every form of business. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, and the opportunity to make money would be somewhat less because it would be shared between more. And I think the thing is, whether you're in tech, whether you're an Uber driver, whether you're in some form of industry at the moment and worried about the impact of changes in tariffs and exports, if you were making cheese and sent it abroad, anything, or everybody is worried about something. Whether you choose to get hung up on the headlines in the paper and say to yourself, the government is governing for me. And I have to say, I agree with you. I do feel that some of the measures are punitive, and I do feel that some of the measures are deliberately targeting landlords as an easy bunch of people to pick on to make more money for the government, whose agenda is to bring in more taxes and more income because it's got to pay for everything. It's much easier to pick on a greedy landlord than it is to slap yet more money on the poor cigarette smokers or the poor whiskey drinkers, because then the whiskey drinkers get taxed and then that affects the whiskey distilleries, So it's just, we're an easy bunch to pick on. But do you then go, all right, okay, well, now I'm going to sulk or cross my arms and give up, or do you just find another way round? And I think, one of the things that we've spoken about before is it's always easy to go, oh, well, you were so lucky years ago and everything was so easy before and now we have to pay an extra 3% stamp duty. It's just life. Then find another way of doing a deal. And quite frankly, if you can get 8% return on your money, that's still better than you can get in the bank. It might not be 10%, but the market isn't at 10% now. And if you want 10%, 12%, 14%, find a different investment technique that will give you those returns.
Indeed, as entrepreneurs, you have to adapt.
Yes.
And I'm finding quite a few landlords aren't in that mindset, and they are struggling with the additional costs and additional burden and whatever else. They are forcing themselves out of the market that they've enjoyed for so long.
But did they enjoy it only because it was easy?
It was easy.
Yes. And I think without being harsh on those people, now it's saying to you, were you just in property because you were making a quick buck, which is what all of the public hated about landlords, or were you in it because you actually saw that it was a business in which you could make money, and I don't have a problem with that at all, but at the same time provide decent homes for your tenants, and in that case, then I think that is a perfectly win-win business model. I'm providing a decent home for my tenants who couldn't get a decent home through any other method other than coming to the marketplace, which is where I am, paying a fair market rate, which is obviously what I must be charging because otherwise they'd have gone to somebody else. And for that fair market rate, I can pay the cost of my borrowing, cover the cost of any expenses for general maintenance, wear and tear, and they get a decent home and I get a decent fair profit. There's no problem with that.
Well, a common objection I hear, Vicki, a lot is property is so expensive. How does one start investing?
Well, what you should do is get a time machine, clearly, and go back to the 1970s. Not quite sure where you would find the appropriate printed currency. Maybe you've got to take diamonds back or gold lumps somehow and buy when it only cost, £100 or £1,000 for a property. But if you haven't got a time machine, you get on with it. And property is always going to be more expensive than it was. Cars are always going to be more expensive than they were, and a loaf of bread is always going to be more expensive than it was. It's just the way, the direction of travel of the cost of things. And you can either choose to go, oh, well, property's now more expensive, so I'm not going to play. Fine. Then go pick a different business model, or stay happily in your job, all of those are perfectly okay. But if what you want to do is take control of your personal finances, and if out of all the different ways that you think that you could do that, you choose property investing as one of them, then understand the maths, understand the cost of borrowing. And yes, if properties are getting more expensive, you've either got to find a way to make more money out of them, or you've got to move to a different area where they don't cost as much, and you can still manage the distance and the time that that takes and invest there where there's more opportunities for you.
And there's also people out there who have money in the bank who may want to lend to you and to fund a deposit if you do it properly.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many ways that you can invest in property. I mean, we talk about ownership as one way, but there's also control. Now, I'm not a big proponent of lease options. I think that in the past they've been overhyped, but there's no reason why you can't become, if you like, a form of a letting agent, which is effectively what rent-to-rent is. You're saying to, and you mentioned them earlier, some of these landlords that are struggling with the costs, why aren't you presenting yourself as a property manager who understands the maths, who understands the tenant demand, who understands and can control the costs of a property, and you could go to one of these more tired landlords, take over their portfolio, manage them for them in a completely different way where you spot the opportunity, and make a wage or a profit on the top for yourself. And as long as you calculate that so that it is actually a decent wage for yourself, and you can afford to cover your expenses and live on that, then that's a perfectly great way to get into property. And then what you can do, depending on your time, is start stacking that money up so that you build up the deposits for yourself. Or as you say, go with joint venture partners. But then you've got to be a great salesperson and have great credibility so that you can go to somebody with money and explain to them why they need to be sharing their money with you in a property deal rather than putting it in the perceived safeness of a bank.
Yeah, and also just make sure that you always have the end goal in mind, and that is to treat it as a business.
Yes.
Treat your tenants as the most important people in the world, which you should, and provide a great service.
Yes. And that's really what any successful business would do. So whether you're thinking about Body Shop or Virgin or anybody else, if you look at how they run their businesses, they understand the maths, they understand that, you know, we even have a sentence, don't we? The customer is king, and the customer in the property world is the tenant. And I've always spoken about my tenants as being my clients. And if you think of them that way, then you treat them better. And if you understand the maths and you understand the tenant needs, then you've got a professional business.
Yeah. So here's a bit of a left field question for you, Vicki. There are some in the political arena who would ask the question, is it moral to buy property for profit when others are struggling to get on the property ladder? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I can't say I like this question, because who are you, not you, obviously Angelos, but who is someone to decide what's moral or not moral? You know, let me explore your life before you start questioning my life, before you start making assumptions. I don't think that I've done anything amoral in all of the property investing that I've ever done. I feel that I have bent over backwards for my tenants. I have worked, for example, with one guy who was a soldier that was released from the armed forces on medical grounds, moved into my property. Because of the government system of not sorting out how he could get his benefits straight away, I knew when I took him on that I was going to have to house him for as much as 2 to 3 months before his benefit payments would come through. Now, you tell me what restaurant would allow you to go and eat for 2 to 3 months before you finally paid your bill. But I'm just an individual, you know, little property investor, and yet I would house this man and be expected to house this man for 3 months before the government would pay me. And that's provided he could jump through all the hoops that he wanted. I did this, and then when push came to the shove, he couldn't come up with the right paperwork, that man would have been homeless. And this is why we have so many armed forces living on the streets, because they do not have the support there to get them through the hurdles. So does that make me amoral for having had a property that might actually have been making a profit had I not had him?
Yeah.
You know, and I've always wanted to provide homes for ultimately the children, but single parent families, because one of the hardest thing when your marriage breaks up is how you function with everything. In the shock of the marriage breakdown, you've still got to manage to get your kids to school, but you've also got to provide, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the fundamentals of a safe place for your children to live that is appropriately warm, appropriately dry. And I've always wanted to do that, because if someone hadn't done that for me in the early days, my daughters and I would have been not quite out on the street, but.
But ultimately, we are providing a good service. Yes, there are good and bad landlords, but there are also good and bad tenants, car salesmen, estate agents, and the list goes on. Yeah. And I just feel that sometimes we are targeted unfairly, and I just feel that they're trying to put a Band-Aid over an artery which is just consistently leaking blood. It's just not going to fix it. To fix the housing problem you need a multi-pronged approach, you need a multi-party approach, and you need a multi-decade approach.
Yes.
This isn't a very quick, put a tax on here, put a tax on there, because ultimately, if you increase costs for a business, it's the end customer who ends up paying.
Yes.
So although it's a great headline that ex-government is taxing greedy landlords again, but the landlords have to recoup that from somewhere.
Of course.
They're being forced to put rents up, which is counterintuitive compared to what the original headline is that the government put out.
But the original premise was completely flawed in the first place, because it was based on news headlines rather than facts, which is the reason, this is the proposal, the reason that there is a problem in the housing market is because greedy landlords are buying the properties that first-time buyers would buy. Okay, so what's wrong with that statement is that you and I would both know, as professional investors, we wouldn't be buying a done-up property. We are looking for a stinky house, one that smells of damp or cat pee or other horrible things, that the wallpaper's falling off, quite possibly even buying properties that are unmortgageable because the kitchen or the bathroom isn't in a habitable state. That the place has got all sorts of damp. And we're buying those properties because we have models that allow us to go in there, renovate that property, which enables us to secure our portfolio and add value right at the beginning, and then turn it into a decent home that somebody can rent. Now, no first-time buyer is going to do that. You speak to any estate agent now, and I've been having a lot of conversations with them over the last few weeks, and they all say that what the buyers are looking for is a property that is done. And the reason they're looking for that is because all of their deposit money needs to be matched against the mortgage, which doesn't leave them the spare cash to renovate the place. They need to have somewhere that is nice for them to move into, and they'd rather pay for that through the mortgage. So they'd rather maximise the mortgage, add all of their savings to it to buy as best as they possibly can now. So their jump on the ladder isn't to a one-bed flat or a two-bed house. They're jumping into three-bed semi-detached or even three-bed detached properties, depending on where in the country you are, because they know that getting on the ladder, they've got to go for as big as they can go so that it'll suit their family that's coming in the future, or combo families, if that's the state that they're at.
We always want bigger and better, don't we? It's human nature.
But so therefore, to put a position where they're taxing us to stop us buying the houses that first-time buyers would buy is erroneous, because we're both actually shopping for two completely things. Yeah. We're looking for an old banger that we can take into a workshop, put in a new engine and do a paint job, and they're looking for something on lease hire that's, a family estate car.
And also landlords and investors are restricted by what the banks will lend to them.
Exactly.
So, for example, only a few weeks ago, we had the thing come out saying that we aren't necessarily allowed to put no LHA or no DSS tenants. That's not necessarily up to us or even the legal system. It's because the banks and them who are lending to us don't necessarily allow us to do it. So even if the legal system says, yes, you must take in LHA,
the lender might not.
The lender may say, well, you're in breach of your terms, and therefore we're going to force you to either move on, sell on, or we'll repossess your property. Absolutely. So it's a catch-22. So it's not fully thought out across different sectors. And this is what really irritates me, is that...
But then what we need to be doing is putting out the good news stories. What we need to be doing is somehow engaging with government. I mean, the number of times I have little daydreams about this, I don't know if you do, just as you're nodding off to sleep and you're thinking, I'm supposed to be sleeping a nice 8 hours and this is the start and my head's going to hit the pillow and I'm going to sleep peacefully and deeply. Oh no, I've just solved out how to fix the housing problem. What we actually need to be doing is getting investors like you and me together in order to take properties that aren't fit for purpose, bring them back into the market so that they can be housing people who need regular houses, and I know they use the phrase brownfield to mean land, but also brownfield houses, houses that are too big that could be split. I mean, I know that we've looked at larger properties that we wanted to split into flats. So we wanted to make 2 ground floor flats and 2 upstairs flats. And they don't want that. The planning departments are out of sync with government policy. They wanted us only to split a house vertically so that everybody's got a downstairs and an upstairs and access to a garden. But that's not what's necessarily important to people. That's what's important to an archaic planning department full of, with due respect, some dinosaurs that are still living in the 1980s when we haven't got this issue. Yeah. And so unless we bring it all together, I mean, we had a recent talk by Theresa May about her views about changing and shaking up, and I felt it was very promising. And I do feel that we need to look at how all of these changes that they're bringing into place. And if you're a professional investor, that's what you will be exploring.
Yeah. So moving forward then, Vicki, I know you work with people in your mentoring program, whatever else, to push them forward. What advice would you give someone looking to quit their 9-to-5 job?
Don't. Straight and simple, don't. And the reason for that is you're mortgageable when you've got pay slips. As soon as you leave your job, you lose those pay slips unless you've got 2 years of a substantial income to prove that you are then able to get even a buy-to-let mortgage. Then you're going to put yourself in a much more difficult position. And just because there's a set of rules today doesn't mean to say those are the same set of rules in a month or 3 months from now. And I would always say to anybody, you need to run things in parallel. Keep your day job so that you've got those pay slips and do property on the side until you get to the point where you've got a proper certified accounts that show you earning a decent wage from your property investment, and then you transfer over. And the other problem is that if all of your income is only from rental, then there are some lenders that won't count that out either, even if it comes through a limited company. So you've got to find a way that you create your limited company that receives the rental income, and maybe you class yourself as a property manager and you become an employee of a property management company, which is actually holding your own portfolio. And so you're like a letting agent getting a wage. But don't go giving your job up. And it's been years that people say this. And when you listen to them, they started investing in property a long time ago when the market was completely different. And they're now in a position where they're not reliant just on their rental incomes. Frequently, they're paid speakers running training businesses and everything else. And it's very easy to stand at the front of the room giving everybody that hint of what people want. They want to give up the day job. And I don't disagree with you as having that as a goal, but plan it so that it ties in with what you need from a financial planning perspective and access to funding.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you make there. I remember one person who went on one of these courses, he was sold the dream. He was very excited, he was going to take over the world, and I think some of the things he was saying, by the end of the year he was going to have a portfolio of 100 properties, and he estimated in 10 years he would be a billionaire. So he quit his job, handed in his notice with some force when he chucked it on the table, he was saying. And then he realised the reality is you can't get a buy-to-let mortgage without your pay slips, like you say. And so he had to go back, tail between the legs, and they wouldn't re-employ him, so he had to find another job. So that was a very harsh reality. But sometimes people are so hyped up by that dream that they don't necessarily look at the reality of the situation.
And I'm not dashing the dream. I don't have a job. And even when I was a university lecturer, obviously as a university lecturer, it's quite weird. I was still on part-time, but I haven't had a job and a manager in that way for, goodness me, more maybe 17 odd years now. It's not easy. You have to get yourself out of bed because there's no one else going to tell you off if you show up to work late. There's no one going to tell you off if you have a 2-hour lunch break. But if you aren't motivated, and if you aren't clear, and if you aren't focused, and if you aren't businesslike so that you know what your financial targets are for the year, and how that's coming in. We were talking about what your plans are for the year, and you've got clear numbers attached. You know that over the next 12 months, you want to do a certain number of projects because that's going to generate a certain amount of income. That's what any business would do. If you don't have that for yourself, how do you think that you're going to generate enough money to create a wage for yourself? And how much do you need to live on? I mean, I used to give different talks, which was maybe too maths heavy for people. It's what they needed to hear, but not necessarily what they wanted to hear. And think about how much do you need to live on a monthly basis. So let's just make the maths nice and say £2,000 a month. And that's £24,000 a year. Now remember, that's net, and of course you've got to pay tax and national insurance contribution. If you're running your own business, you've got to pay for your car, your mobile phone, business cards, internet, website, Facebook adverts, everything else that you've got to pay for. How much money do you actually need? And then if you start breaking that down to an hourly rate, you've got to work hard to generate that level of income. Whereas when you had a job, you swanned in at 9 o'clock, somebody else had made all the plans, and all you had to do was what you were told. You didn't have to do the thinking. It's been hard over 17 years to constantly think of what is the plan for the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, and how am I going to meet that, and what staff resources do I need, and then how am I going to pay for them, and then, okay, so in order to do that I need advertising. Well, then I need more money to pay for the advertising, so then I actually need to do more than the original plan in order to pay for the costs of delivering the first plan. You know, that's not an easy alternative to having a job. When you have a job, you have a pension, you have annual leave.
Which brings me on to my next question nicely, because you are a big scuba diving fan, and you're also known as a Property Mermaid. Can a work-life balance be really achieved?
It's a choice. It's a choice. I mean, when I listen to how many projects you were doing and the scale of your projects this year, I maybe guess, I might be wrong, but you might have less holidays than me this year. And it's a choice. I mean, look at your age compared with my age. I don't want to take over the world. I just want to create a business that is determined by me. If I work hard, I will succeed. If I don't work as hard or I'm not successful at it, then I won't have as much income as I'm looking for. And if I need a certain amount of income, I'm going to work for it because it's in my power to do that. And that will generate the lifestyle that I want. And I want to be able to have time off. In November 16, we got our first granddaughter, and I decided that I was going to take a month off, mainly because you never know when a baby's going to show up, so I had to be a bit flexible for her to decide to arrive, and I wanted to be there to support my daughter. And then once we'd got through that and Christmas, we went away on a holiday out to Zimbabwe, and then when I came back, I knew I only wanted to work a 4-day week. So I worked a 4-day week so I could have 1 day off a week to be with her. But I planned it.
Yeah.
You know, and if you plan what you want to do, you can go and play golf on a Wednesday morning or scuba dive for a month 3 times a year if that's what you want to do. But you build it into your business plan. And therefore, I have never done rent to rent because I don't want to be a 24/7 letting agent. I would never create an investment plan that required me to be constantly here because I want to have that flexibility to go away when I want to. And the first thing we do, well, whenever it is that it occurs in the year, but at least from November, is we get that new great big calendar that you can pin up to the wall, and it's all laid out, all 365 days. And I get my red pen and my red stickers out, and I map in all the holidays, and then work goes round it. And work goes round it in order to generate the income to provide for the red holidays that are on there already.
Yeah. So, Vicki, this podcast is all about success, and I consider you to be a great success, and you're still ongoing, which is brilliant.
Thank you.
And as such, we ask everyone that we interview, what does success mean to you?
Living your life by your design. I think it's as simple as that. And what lies underneath that sentence is taking responsibility. If you want to have lots of holidays, that's absolutely fine. How are you going to fund them? Create the business that will generate that income in a way that also ticks other boxes that are your values. So creating, in my case, decent homes for decent tenants to live in, providing a good quality service, always responding to maintenance queries, not being super greedy. I mean, we've had this additional costs going through the business. We haven't put our rents up because actually I felt like I made significant rent anyway. You know, I didn't need to increase my rents and make things harder on my tenants who I felt were paying a fair market rate at the time. So you just need to create anything that you want in your life yourself by identifying the resources that are needed. So if it's a certain style of life and you need money for that, then you need to look at how you're going to spend your time, your knowledge, leverage your contacts to create that income. If it's that you want to give back in the community and hold down a job, then that's absolutely fine. You'll have a job during the week. How are you going to find the time to then give to the community? Will it be your knowledge, your skills? There's lots of people who have brilliant jobs out there that could be giving back in the community by running a little course if they wanted to, and not necessarily making a profit, or maybe making a profit. We've talked about books. Maybe you know stuff that you could share with other people, and with social media and technology the way it is, there's no reason why anybody with a passion or a specific knowledge or skill that they could be sharing for the benefit of others couldn't be writing a book, creating a video channel, or doing a podcast like you're doing. So whatever you want, it's merely down to you to decide it and then set about finding the resources and making it happen. Your life by your design.
I like that. That's brilliant. Thank you, Vicki. I've been inspired, and I'm sure others will have by listening or watching this. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you and find out more about some of the other stuff that you're doing as well, aren't you?
Okay, so the simplest thing you can do is look at the website, as always, and I know that you'll put it on the show notes. So that's vickiwusche.com. And Vicki spelt with an I. People can always spell the Wusche bit, but not always the Vicki bit. And if you want to email, then it's vicki@wusche-associates.co.uk. So you can get in touch with me either of those ways. Also, you and I tend to chat a lot in Facebook, don't we? So find me on Facebook again as Vicki Wusche, and then send me a message, and then we can transfer over into email as and when. Always happy to have conversation with people. It's easier if we do it in some typed form, like an email or a Facebook message, because then I can answer it when it's easier for me to answer it, if that's a polite way to put it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicki. So thank you again for your time, and really appreciate you coming on today.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you for asking.
We want to know your thoughts and experiences about Vicki's incredible journey and the advice that she's given us today. So drop us an email on hello@yoursuccesspodcast.com, or get in touch on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So thank you again, Vicki, and thanks to you at home for listening to Your Success Podcast. Please click subscribe, leave us a review, and we look forward to your comments on the Facebook page and our YouTube channel. I've been Angelos, and see you again on the next exciting episode of Your Success Podcast.
You have been listening to Your Success Podcast. Click subscribe for more incredible content. More details can be found at www.yoursuccesspodcast.com.